This week, number 5, I announced to be the one in which we will be going over the HTML, the CSS and the browser history. I have decided to pull now 1 week in between, as I find it to give us then a better understanding of the history, which we are now doing next week, and it also gives us a good review of what we have done last week. So therefore this week is not about history, instead it's about text, mainly about text. So what we do in the first half of this week is we go over all the properties that are in charge of giving our text its appearance, such as text decoration, of underlining things, making things bold, etc. So in terms of vocabulary, we are away from positioning now in this week. Instead, we are into styling. Styling text, right? These properties we want to go over in the first half, while still using our two elements that we already know, the div and the span element. And in actual fact, then in the second part, we will find out that with those two elements alone, the div is a block level element and the span is a text display inline element. Let's display block, display inline. And with those two elements, with the span element, we can achieve the result of all these elements in terms of appearance. And with the div, we can achieve the result of all these elements in terms of appearance as well. However, those ones are neutral elements. They do not have any meaning. And ultimately, our content, our elements shall have meaning, because there are two other parties that read our code, one of which are search engine robots and the other ones are screen readers, which are used by sight disabled people. And those ones are very much reliant upon that our content has meaning. Therefore, we should always use the meaningful elements whenever we can, unless there is no alternative. Then we go for the div and then we go for the span. Otherwise, it's always the other ones. And that one we will further discuss in the second half. This meaning is further, or it's better known under the topic of semantics, giving sense, touchable meaning to our content. Let's start, however, with our giving our text its appearance in all the properties that exist there, the CSS properties, and let us continue using those div and span elements, those two only. Now this text that I have already inserted here, it's been displayed by the browser line by line by line. If I go back now into the HTML file, actually here I have quite a nice structure already, how that text I want actually to look like. Each of that text shall be in its own line, because what I have here is two sections. One section on children's stories and the other one on scientific papers. And then there's the headline of the child story, and then who it's been written by, paragraphs. And this shall always be nicely divided up into its own lines that they shall occupy. But this one is not the case right now, because as we know, the browser removes all white spaces and all line breaks by default. Therefore, ultimately, displaying our text, or that text right here, line by line, without any structure inside it. Now we know that the property that is in charge of whether white spaces and line breaks shall be removed or whether they shall be kept is the white space property. So we could achieve it. We could now tell the browser, hey, white space, or not the white space, but the line breaks, remain, or don't remove the line breaks. And that will ultimately result in that structure being displayed on the screen. But this is just not the way to go, because ultimately, of course, we want each of these lines here, we want to style them differently. For example, that headline, children's stories, that section headline shall have a different appearance than shall the story, the headline story, have. And also who it's been written by shall have a different appearance. We want this one, for example, to be italic, for example. That one a little bit bold and a little bit greater font size. This a little bit different greater font size, so all differently. And we cannot really select text, as we know. So always what we need to do, we need to wrap an element around the text. And an element such as a div or a span element. Now a div element is the one that gives us a block level, is display block by default. And that one already straight away gives us the appearance that we ultimately want to have. We want to have that one in its own line. Because div elements, once again, are display block and they occupy the entire line, therefore causing whatever comes afterwards having to move into the next line. There is no space for Alibaba, for the remaining text here. It has to go into the next line. So in terms of structure for our text, we can that all achieve by using the div elements. in order to bring things down into a new line where we actually want things to have, same as the headline of this text now. And in terms of giving our content its appearance, individual words that are not block level, then we can use the span element, the one that we have introduced as well, just by wrapping this one word inside its element, allowing us then to target this span element, and therefore giving only this one word here its own appearance, its own color, background, whatever we want to have. So with div and span, we achieve the entire result in terms of structure and stylistic appearance for our content. And without you watching me now to mark up this text with div elements and span elements, I have already pre-done this previous to this week, because this is what we already know. We know how to use divs and spans. Therefore, let me just remove that part here and insert already the marked up part, the part that is already marked up with all the elements, with all the divs that I have here. So first of all, let us view that text. And now this is the exact structure that I wanted. I wanted everything that is in a separate line, I wanted to be in a separate line, caused by the div elements. This is one paragraph occupying its one box here, and causing whatever comes afterwards. The next paragraph has to move down into the next line as well. So things are now structured by all these divs elements. Let me briefly go over what I actually have here. I have two containers that include the entire section. One section is on children's stories, the other one is on scientific papers, which div element ends right here. It includes the entire section. And then inside the section there is always a div element for each section headline. And then I have an entire own box for the entire article related things, so the entire text, including paragraphs, its headline, etc. And in here is then a div for the headline itself and for each paragraph, ultimately resulting in this structure here. And now let us start to give our text its appearance by making use of those properties here, all the text related properties. And let us start with color, for example. So let us now, for example, let me first of all insert a span element here, which is already, I have created one. I have given it an ID of XY, and pour as himself and live by, I want to now give a different color. So therefore I've wrapped it inside a span, and now I will be targeting it by its ID. And that shall be right, or it doesn't really matter actually. Let me put it right in here, XY. And now let me give it a certain color, and the only colors that we know of so far are color names. And there are other ways to do things, which we may recall from week number 1, where we briefly touched on that each color actually has its own code by which we can achieve any color that exists out there. And right now we are still using though the names, which we cannot access any color. Many colors we can have names, but not any color. But let's stick with names, and now I have made this little text here, given it now a different color. Next one is text decoration, and here we define whether we want to decorate that text with a line, and whether that line shall be underneath the text, over the text, or through the text. Right now it is none, and now what we can do is underline. So of course we are underlining now the text. Another value that we can use is overline, and another one is line through, which crosses a line through the text. So this is what text decoration does. Next one is text transform, which we do not really have any use case yet. Though let's go over what it does, because we are already discussing everything relating to text. So we can transform that text to, for example, uppercase. We can also transform it to lowercase, for example, or to capitalize. Capitalize, of course, meaning that each word, the first letter of each word, is now uppercase. However, of course, we could have done that already inside our text ourselves, because our website, when using HTML and CSS, it's a static website. This one gives us maybe a better feeling what static actually is and dynamic, because with static means we could have done that already beforehand. So there was no need to make use of that text transform. However, later, for example, if we are allowing persons, for example, to post comments, for example, or anything like that. It's all dynamic then we don't have control of what's being posted or of what's being drawn immediately from databases later. So therefore, then it makes a lot of sense to use once our website are dynamic when using languages such as JavaScript and PHP. But for now, it's just to know that it does exist. It is there. Next one is text shadow. And text shadow is not a shortcut. However, it consists of 4 values, and 3 of them must be used as a minimum. What can we do with text shadow? Text shadow makes sense on its own. But what can we do? Of course, we can define how far the shadow shall go to the right, how far the shadow shall go down on each letter, and what color the shadow shall have. So these are 3 of the values. So let me give it a, to the right it shall go 2 pixel the shadow, to down it shall go 3 pixel, and the color that I want to use is red. And that text shadow doesn't look good at all. So there is one more value that comes at position number 3, and that is the blur. And here we can define, as the name implies, we can tell the browser to blur, to fade that color red. So here we can see it looks much better, and in fact it looks really nice here. So the blur is the 3rd value here. First value is how far to go to the right with the shadow, how far to go down, the blur and the color. So next one is the user select. And the user select, that one I will come back to at the very end of this week, at the end of this video. Because the user select, there is something we must pay attention to. And this is because it's also highlighted here it's written in a blue color. And that always tells us that there are cross-browser issues, which we sometimes encounter. And the reason here for this one having a cross-browser issue is because user select is yet a property that is still in testing phase. And that one will be part of next week as well. And who is actually in charge of releasing those properties, those vocabulary here? That is part of next week. For now, let us just say this stands for Mozilla Firefox MOZ. When something is still in testing phase, then prefixes must be used before, previous to the actual vocabulary, previous to the actual property. This is the prefix. And this is the prefix used for Mozilla Firefox only. And first of all, what does user select now do? So here we can define whether something can be selected on our website, such as the text, or not only text, images also get highlighted when the left mouse gets pressed down and the cursor moves over it. And we can prevent this, not because we want people to not copy and paste our text, but it just sometimes happens that also when using finger on the screen, when touch screen, that things get highlighted all of a sudden. And if we want to prevent that from happening for stylistic reasons, that because that one doesn't look good, then we can do so by using the user select. So what we can use here is we can say none. So none of that shall be selected. And let me actually now do this, set this property on the body because it's also an inherited property. So everything, the entire document, the entire website will receive now that setting. Nothing can be selected anymore. Neither can the image be selected. So there is not this selection appearance on elements, which doesn't look good. So that is what we can use here. Another value that exists here is the none. The all. And the all is, it selects everything, which I do not have really any use case for, but it exists. And we can say text. So only text shall be selectable, but not images or anything alike, such as input fields. Only text. And this prefix says that this is still in testing phase, this property. And when something is still in testing phase, this means that things can still change, meaning that values can, for example, change, or they change the property name as well, depending on how things work out when they are done testing with those things. And that means if they ultimately change a value or if they, for example, say, ultimately it shall be, just a dumb example, users select, then this will ultimately cause our website, which we have already created previous to them changing it, that will cause our website to not have that effect anymore. It will break our website. It will not have that effect because they have changed things. So therefore they always use these prefixes, meaning if they change something later and then come back to the original, then the original version will be used without prefix, meaning those ones will be fine, and those ones who are still using the prefixed versions with the old names that they used in the old values, it will still be okay for all the websites out there. So that's the reason behind it. And we will go over that in further detail next week, because in actual fact there are not only MOZ, but there is for Microsoft we need to specify it, which is Internet Explorer. Mods stands for Mozilla Firefox, and WebKit is representing the version, the prefixed version for Opera, which is another major browser, for Chrome, another major browser, and Safari, another major browser. So those ones we need to make use of. So I come back to that towards the end of this video once again, but that's the reason behind it. This is user select. It has some cross-browser issues. Let me now remove that one here again, and let us go to the next property, and that one is cursor. Even though cursor doesn't really have anything directly to do with text, I didn't know where to put this one, so I just placed it under other styling. Therefore I want to quickly go over that one as well. The cursor of course determines how the mouse shall look like when going over that certain element. So let me go back to our XY span element, that little bit of text that we have targeted, and let me make the cursor here. Pointer is the regular one. So for example, pointer is this one. But once we go over text, it changes to this one. And now I've changed it to pointer, which is indicating, hey, this is a link. Same as with links here. So this is what we can use. There are many values that we can use that are here. For example, move, if we want to indicate that this one can be dragged away. So this is what we can use. There are many values which we can all find under CSS details if we want to. Without me now going over all of them. Let us rather focus now on font, the other properties that we have in terms of giving our text its stylistic appearance. So font exists also in its shortcut, but let us first go over the individual properties. And here we can see once again these are inherited, so is user select and text transform and color, because it's often the case that we want our entire website to have a certain color. And therefore all we need to do then is to set our color on the body element. And the body element, of course, as we discussed last week, is the most top element that has the entire content inside. And once we do the color here, set the color here, everything else will ultimately inherit that color. And same happens for transform and select. Often it's the case we want that for the entire website to happen. Same for font family and font size, etc. So this is why these are inherited properties. In comparison to last week, those ones were inherited because we cannot really select text. So the idea behind it was to select the parent, because text elements that are inherited are always set on the parent, and then they get inherited down to the text. So this was the inheritance reason last week. Now it's just to prevent us from having to duplicate our code, from giving the font family, for example, to each and every element. Instead, we don't give it to each and every one. We just set it on the body and that's it, and then we are done. So let's go for font. Let me do these settings again on, or let me actually now target one of our headers. So the section headline for our both sections, they're using the same class here, the children's stories and the scientific papers. Let me target those ones and let me give them a font weight of being bold. And as the name implies, nothing special here. Now they are bolded. Next one we want to go over is font style, and that one here we determine whether things shall be italic or not. Right now it's normal. Same for bold. Right now it was medium and now it's bold. Now for style, it's italic that we can set here. And now that text, of course, will be italic, slanted to the right. Next one is font size. Here we determine how high, how the size of the text, of course. And let us stick here with the values, the fixed values that we have been gotten to know mainly so far, which are pixels. So now we are telling the browser, hey, make it 18 pixel fixed. That's how we want it, 18 pixels. Because later we will be introducing also relative units. So besides pixels, what also exists is EM, then rem, and percentages, for example. And font size has also smaller, for example, or larger. So these are all relative units. Relative meaning percentage of what? Smaller of what? And always relating to the parent and parent, grandparent, all the hierarchy up ultimately. Ultimately saying it's ultimately pretty much all is dependent up on the size of the browser window. We can pretty much say, because what we ultimately of course want to achieve is a website. We want our website to be visible in terms of visibility on small screens and on very large screens. So in terms of mobile phone, this is how a website could look like. Then in terms of iPad, for example, for tablets, for example, it's this size. This is how the website looks on iPad. And then ultimately this is on desktop browsers, but also larger, going up until TV. We want our website to look good, same referring to the text. And on large TV screens, people are not sitting in front of that screen directly. They are sitting further away. Therefore, the text ultimately needs to be depending on how wide the screen is ultimately. Therefore, we will be using relative units later to achieve this effect that people using a TV screen and sitting further away from the screen, they can still read the text. But for now, let us stick with just pixels. That's all okay for now. And yeah, this is what the font size does, of course. It determines the size of the font. Now another one is the font variant. And there is another variant that we can use, another version, how stylistically the text looks like. Right now it is normal, and now I'm changing it to small caps, the only value that we can really use here. And this is the effect that it receives. So there is another variant of displaying the text, another version, and called small caps. If we ever want to use this, it makes things in uppercase here, and the first letter is always taller than all the other letters. So this is font variant. Now last one is font family, last one of the shortcut, family, and exactly in that order that we have now specified: variant, style, weight, size, and family. This is the shortcut exists also if we want to set things in at the same time in the shortcut. Now with font family we will be spending a little bit of time on now, because that one is a little bit we need to discuss that in more detail. It's more extensive than everything else now. Font family, first of all. Font family, of course, as the name implies, it's these families that we have always here, the families. And those ones can be divided up into 5 major categories on the web. And those 5 categories are better known as generic font families. These are the top categories under which all other font families are inside. One of which is monospace. And monospace means mono means equal space in between the letters. So here we can see this is the effect. Now our headlines are monospace, and there are equal spaces in between letters, and it's like typewriting style. And all the font families that do this effect are under the category of monospace. Next one, let me actually copy and paste this down. The next one is cursive, for example. Cursive is handwriting. All the ones that are handwriting, kind of where the letters go into each other a little bit, merge into each other. All the handwriting kind of styles. That's cursive. Another top category. There are 5 in total. And now let me go for the next one, which is serif. And that one makes right here there is not really a letter where it is indicated. Let me go right in here. So serif fonts are the ones on which that have a couple of letters in that font that end. The ending is kind of projected here. It's kind of slanted, skewed, like at the Y that we can see here, or at the J. So these are serif fonts. Then the opposite pretty much of serif is sans serif, which says, hey, don't do those things. The letters shall always not be skewed towards somewhere. They shall always end like kind of broken. So the opposite is sans serif. So we have serif and sans serif. So that's the other one. And now the last one is fantasy on the web, which are all the decorative fonts, all of them. Now decorative fonts can usually pretty easily be identified because they look strange. So these are the 5 top categories that we have in terms of font family. And under all these 5 categories, they are all the fonts that exist. Now it depends what font do we want to use? Are we free to use any font that we want to? And this is the case. We can of course do that, but it always depends ultimately on the operating system, what font families are installed on the operating system of the person visiting our website. So my operating system, for example, I'm using a Windows operating system. And on my operating system, these fonts are installed. The ones that are highlighted here, the ones that are not faded out. So these ones, they are all installed. And these are ultimately the ones that appear, in my case, in my Excel sheet, in my Word document. These are the ones that I have available. And these are also the ones that my browser is able to display inside for a certain website. So if I'm now using Cambria, which is fine, which is installed, let me just change it to Cambria, then this one will be applied perfectly. So therefore we cannot just use any font family and then be sure that it will work for whoever visits our website. That person then will always be able to use that font family. So we should ultimately, of course, always either download the font family or we should link to a font family where it can be downloaded. The 2 options that we will now go over in a second. So let's go for the first option. And of course, we ultimately want the font family to be right on top in the body. So there are many websites out there that we can use to get font families from. One of which is Google Fonts. It has quite an extensive number of font families, and here are the categories once again. While monospace, sans serif are listed the same name, handwriting is used instead of cursive here, and I assume that display is referring to fantasy ones, I assume. So, but these are the top categories out of which we can choose a font family from, and the quickest use to get this working, the font family working on our website, is to use quick use. So to press this button here on the font family that we want to use. And once we are here, then all we need to do is take that link, copy and paste it inside our head element, without me now go over into detail what we actually do here. That's it, save it, and then next link, that one needs to be set on the element where we want that font family to be used. And usually it's the body, so right in here. And now everything has been working, later is gonna be applied. That's the quickest option to use, and I will go over the details, what we actually have done here, what we have inserted here in a moment. And once I have discussed, first of all, what are all these versions here. So right now, the only version that I've been using, that I've been linking to, is normal 400. So multiple ones can be used here, and this is when the URL changes here as well. So ultimately including more than just the normal version. What is the use case of this? Does that mean if we, for example, only take the normal 400, the regular size as it is displayed here, if we only take that version of the font, does that mean that we can then not make our text italic and bold? And this is not the case. As we can see here, our headlines are still bolded and italic. But they are bolded and italic in a way that the browser chooses them to be bolded and italic. And here, these are the ways that the font family is actually bolded and italic. So it's specific to this font family how things shall be bolded and italic. Now this is most likely something rather for web designers. Usually all we want is the normal one, but for web designers this one is important to know because they want to make use of it. Those ones with a more programming oriented focus, this one is rather irrelevant, I would say. And also let us go once again back to the font weight, which is right down here. The font weight we have set to bold, and here we can actually also use values such as between 100 and 900. But these values will only work usually when we have when we have those versions of that font available in that number. So 100 means that is the lightest one, the thinnest one, and 900 is the most boldest version of that font. And usually the only thing that work here are either small, medium, and large, bold. So thin, medium, and bold. That's pretty much it that works. And it only works, the other things only work when we download the according font family as well. So what we usually do here, we either use bold or non-bold. So that is the regular way, or not the regular, the most common way to what values we are using. So let's go over the next option, download that font family instead of linking to another website where that one will be downloaded. So let us once again go for the Lato font, and instead of going to quick use, we add it to the collection. And once we have done so, then we can download it. And here it will ask us how we want to download it, usually a zip file. Once we click it, the download starts. And what we will ultimately receive is a zip file in which all these versions are inside. And we can see here that all these font family versions are in the format of TTF. And TTF is same with music. There are different formats. And TTF is not the format that is supposed or suggested to be recommended to be used on the web. Instead, it is the WOFF format, WOFF, at least in the year that we have achieved so far, 2016, so at least nowadays. And therefore, we should convert that font family from its TTF format to the WOFF format, for which there are a couple of different websites out there where we can do such things. So what we need to do on this website, for example, first need to agree here, then upload it or pick it, select it, and then convert. And ultimately, once again, we receive a zip file, and that is our converted font family version, now in the format of WOFF. And that one we should be using. Now I'm now only doing this process with one file, even though there are all the other files, but it's exactly the same process. So let me only do it with the Lato regular right now, which I have already included inside my directory. So what I have done is inside the media folder, where there are all the things that ultimately will be embedded or included onto the website, such as CSS and images, I also created a font folder here, and under there I placed that font file. And this file we now want to include. And it's gonna be the font family for our content. So it's appearance, has to do with appearance. Therefore we do these things inside CSS. It has to do with appearance, and whenever we include something relating to appearance, we use the add symbol. And as we are including a font file, we use font face, add font face, and then those angle brackets, same as with regular CSS. And in here we do the specifications, the CSS rules, the properties and the values. And one that we need to use is first of all font family, how we want to name the font family. So we can call it ABC, whatever we want to. And then what we also need to do is font weight and font style. So the font style is, we can always find that one out as we have, it's the normal regular, as we can, let me first of all go for later, so it's the regular, the normal 400. Font style is normal, and the font weight is 400. And now comes the URL. Now here we are including, here comes the source property, and here is a URL function. And also a format function in which we need to specify the format, and here we need to specify the path now to include that font family. And those functions, what they actually are, let me postpone that one to later. Let us just know that right in here comes the path, and right in here we need to specify the format. And the format for us is WOF, and the path is now, right now we are inside the CSS file, therefore we need to go out one folder, then inside fonts folder, and then we can include that file. So going out one folder, period, always divided up by /, the folders and the files, and then we go into the fonts folder, and then we can include the actual file. So now we are almost done. The only thing that we now need to change here is the font family. Now we can use the font. This is only for inclusion. What we want to name it, what the style, the weight is, and the source, including the format. And here now let's make use of it. So right on the body again, we want our entire website to have the font family. Now it's ABC though, the same name as we have given it up here, and this one will work as well. Nothing has changed, same process, same thing has worked. Let me first of all remove that one. So here we see exactly same effect. Now with font family we can see that there is a comma, and then comes another keyword here that is not wrapped inside quotation marks. Now we should always wrap our names in quotation marks. This one could have done without it, but if we have multiple words that consist of multiple words, let's always put it in quotation marks, so we never need to follow any rules. However, this one doesn't need to be and is not. And this one is the font family backup, a generic font, one of those 5 main categories. And the Lato font, which I have now renamed to ABC, the Lato font is a sans serif font. It's under that main category. So should there ever be a problem downloading the Lato font or including it, then fall back to a sans serif font, because the Lato font is under that category as well. So should there be a problem, then our website, the text on our website at least looks in the same direction, under the same top category, has the same appearance, that text, in case there is ever a problem with downloading the file. So therefore we should always specify a backup. That's the backup. This one will be used, and that's the backup. So that's font family. Now let me go make one more comment on the first version, that we could use the quick way of using the font family, which is linking to the Google server. But the question here of course is, why are we linking? This is a style sheet that we are linking to. We are using here the link element, which we always use to include something on the website, and the relationship we specified as style sheet, meaning it's a style sheet that we are including, a CSS file. Now this type attribute we don't need to worry, because the value text-/CSS is always default whenever we insert a style sheet, so that one is irrelevant. But why are we including a style sheet? So let me go to that path now, and let's take a look. Where are we actually going to? And we are going in fact to a style sheet. And right in here it's the link to the actual font family that we want to download, that we want to use on our website. So in the same matter, this is how Google does things here. We first go to the Google website, and then to the website where that font family is actually available. So even though if we use this first option, the quick use option, I would recommend to not use first link to the style sheet. I would straight away copy and paste this one over to the styles here, because then there is only one link going to one server. Otherwise it has to go to the server to Google and then to the server of gstatic, whichever server that is, to get the font from. So I would do it this way, my recommendation at least. And it does things the same way as we did. The only difference, it's also using here two other functions which we don't need to worry about though. So these are the two options that we have in order to include a font family onto our website, in order that we can always be certain that this font family will be used, and if not, then fall back at least to a font family that is under the same category, under the same top category. So this is it now. This is part number 1 of this week that we have now gone over. We have gone over all the properties which we can use to style our text, to give our text the stylistic appearance. And now we are going over the semantics. All semantics means is meaning, and we now want to give our content meaning, because search engine robots and screen readers, two other softwares besides the browser, are also reading our HTML code ultimately. And they are very much reliant upon that our content, our elements have meaning that is very much helpful to them. So what does the browser first of all do? When it reads this file, it parses it. That's the jargon word once again. It parses that HTML code. It can read it, it can make sense of it. The browser has an HTML parser built in that can read that code. And so have search engine robots, which is a software that follows links. It follows links, one link to the other, and then it always reads the HTML file. So search engine robots is a software that also has a HTML parser built in that can make sense of that code here. And the better the search engine robots understand what our content here is about, the better they can ultimately list our page in the search engine results. So this is why we should have meaning inside our HTML file with our elements. Now comes the next party, and these are screen readers used by sight disabled people. And those screen readers is just a software that has a voice built in, a voice that talks to the sight disabled person. Hey, sight disabled person, this is what is on this website, so it can tell the person here what is there. And the better meaning our content has, the better the screen reader voice can tell the sight disabled person what is on the website, and the more shortcuts that sight disabled person can use. Shortcuts on his keyboard in order to jump around. And those screen readers, let us go for an example. Of course, screen readers and search engine robots, they completely don't mind how the content appears. They are only interested in the content itself, in the HTML. CSS is irrelevant. And sight disabled people, they are of course not using the mouse. They are using shortcuts, the keyboard. And they can use shortcuts as well. So if our navigation, for example, wasn't just created, let me first of all delete that one again. So if our navigation box right here wasn't created with just a div element, but instead, for example, with a nav element, which does exactly the same thing as the div. The only difference is it gives meaning to it. So let me go for it and change it to nav. And this would mean that the sight disabled person could now jump to the nav. It could use a shortcut on his keyboard or his or her keyboard, and then could jump to the navigation. So this is very much useful for sight disabled people. We should always make our content accessible. We should always give it meaning. So ultimately, screen readers can do it, or sight disabled people can navigate on websites, and also that search engine robots can ultimately better understand what content we have on our website, and therefore providing the ultimate end user a better search experience than if that wasn't the case. So all these parties, whether it be the browser that has an HTML parser built in that reads our code, whether it be the screen reader or the search engine robots, all of them are ultimately providing a service to the end user, and therefore to bring them under a common category name, they are called user agents. They are ultimately an agent to the user providing a service to the user. And now let's get started with replacing our div elements with the according meaningful element. All these ones here have exactly the same default appearance as the div. Let us go now into the Mozilla default style sheet. We know that the browser does this default appearance. And how does it actually do it? It has also its own style sheet. For example, let me go for nav. Here we can see the nav is here, the footer, the div. They are all set to display block. This is what they receive as default. So this is what's been used on all these elements. They are display block by default. So nothing will change now in terms of appearance once we now change our elements. All that changes is that we now have meaning on our website, which is great. So the header, first of all, let's change the header here to its according element, its according meaningful element. Then comes the main container after the navigation, which is the main container is the yellow one, in which the green and the blue box is within, so the main area of the page. So that one we change to main, and this one ends right down here, and then comes the footer. And of course we can now, for most of these elements, remove the ID. We don't need to select these elements by its ID anymore, because we can select them by type. Because footer and header, for example, and main as well, they only exist once. This element only exists once, so therefore an ID becomes irrelevant. Now navigations, for example, sometimes we have two of them, but if we only have one navigation, same thing here, the ID becomes irrelevant. We can target the element by its type, element type. Let's go inside the actual main part. So here we have an aside container, and that one actually has its own meaningful element as well, the aside element. And now let's go into the green box, in which the actual content of this page is in, the main content. And in here I divided things up into two sections. One section is on children's stories and the other section is on scientific papers. And exactly, sections also have their equivalent meaningful element, which is section. So let us replace those ones here as well. Section, and that one starts right here. Section, and now let's go into the article. Article also, and that does not only refer to articles itself, because I'm having a children's story here, which is not really an article. But anything article-like can use and should use the according element, article element. So let me replace those ones, and also the scientific article right here, article, and right here as well. And this is it. Now we have gone over all the ones that we have listed under the main boxes. All the ones we have now gone over. And in terms of appearance, let's reload the page. Nothing has changed, because all of them by default are display block and nothing else. But this will change now once we go over, now replace our div elements with the according elements that are here. For example, the first one here is the header element. And the header element, the h1, for example, that one has a further default appearance besides being only display block. Let me find it for a second. So it is display block, it's font size 2 EM, which we haven't discussed yet, but it's 2 times greater than regular, then font weight bold, and it has a margin on top and bottom, which Firefox uses its own internal property names here, which we don't need to worry about. This is margin top and margin bottom. So this is what the header element gets by default. So let's take a look how this then ultimately appears. So we have two headers here. One, I have section. For each section I have a header, which is children's stories and scientific papers. Let me give that one therefore h1. Always the most top header on a page must receive h1. And then all subsequent headers go down into h2, h3, h4. And it must always be done in that order. We shall never start at h3 or h4, always at h1. And this one will therefore be h2, header 2, the header that is a subsequent header of h1. And same down here. The section header is H1, headline 1. And then inside this section there is an article that has a headline as well, and that one is going to be H2. And now let us take a look how this is now being displayed on the screen by the browser. Here we can see. So let me just mark it for a second. Let me mark one of the actual box here. So what it does to a header element, same thing, it's display block, meaning it's taking up the entire line, causing whatever comes afterwards having to go into the next line. What it also does, margin bottom, margin top by default, and greater font size and font weight bold. So these are the default settings that are done on the header element. Now the top header here, the H1 element, is a little bit smaller because I have reset it previous already. I have done some settings as we had gone over before, which I have right here. So if I remove that one once again here, then this one is greater as well too. So these are header elements which already have some other default appearance set on them as well. Now, didn't we say already, haven't we discussed that each element, whether it be a H1 element or any other element, actually has a value for any property, not just those specified here. So, but instead, in CSS, for all properties that we ultimately go over, and an element has a certain value assigned to it. But here are only a few of them. These are the browser defaults. And ultimately, if none of us specifies anything, then another value will be assigned to a certain property that we have not specified, which is then the initial value, which we go over next week to further understand the difference between defaults and initial, which ultimately, once we have discussed it once, we can ultimately nevertheless always think of it as defaults in general. So this is just to give a brief preview of next week. And now let us continue with further elements out there that we have. Paragraphs, for example. Next one is paragraphs. So we have paragraphs on our page as well. So right here, 2 paragraphs I have right here in our child story. And instead of using the div, the p element shall be used right here as well. P element, the meaningful version, which does also display block, as all of them are display block here. All of them are display block, same as those. They are block level elements. And they are block, and in addition, what paragraphs are also, they have a margin on top and bottom. So by default, because this is most likely what we want to have, so things are further apart. So similar to the header, there's also margin on top and bottom, same as on the paragraphs. Then the next one is what actually happens if we want this text from here onwards. If we want that one in a new line, but we don't want to indicate that this is a new paragraph. This is just for better readability. We want to bring that into a new line. And this is where we make use of the BR element. And a similar one we have already seen last week, which is WBR. And WBR shall be used to break a word in the middle, for example. As we can, for example, here planted, there's quite a large gap here which doesn't look good, for example. So we can say planted shall be in the middle of that one. Let me just do it once again. Planted, if I find it straight away, which I don't. Somewhere here, but in the middle of somewhere we use the WBR instead of the BR. BR stands for break, WBR stands for word break. So this is how we get things into a new line without indicating, without providing that meaning that this is a new paragraph. Then from its original intent, what people came up with is the HR element, horizontal rule. And its original idea was to provide a stylistic division in between paragraphs, such as this line or this line, the horizontal rule or line horizontally. And that one is just for stylistic purposes. We can use it on paragraphs. We can use it for other things as well. So it's not in particularly only referring to paragraphs, can be used, but it's a meaningful one to tell this is a division here. We are stylistically dividing things up. And now comes the tree we have discussed last week. Anything that is in here will be preserved, white space and line breaks, and the address makes sense as well. So when we have an address on our website, we should wrap it inside that one. As for example, if a sight disabled person is visiting, if we are building a small to medium a website for a company, and if that address is wrapped inside the address element, then the sight disabled person can use a shortcut. If, for example, that person only visited the website to find out the address, it comes on that website, uses its shortcut address, immediately finds it. Wonderful for him. So he doesn't need to move around find it very difficult in a difficult way. So perfect. So this one should be done as well, address. So this is for address. And then now we are going into text elements. Block quote still exists, but I do that at the same time as I will be discussing quote and cite right here. So let's go into text elements. Are all the elements that are displayed in line, which we use to give text that shall remain in one line, to give it individual appearance or different appearance, and also meaning. For example, let's start with DEM. If we have a word, whichever one it is, that shall be emphasized, that has emphasis, we should use the EM element. It stands for emphasis, and also screen readers, that the voice that talks to the sight disabled person is supposed to emphasize then this word, and then indicating to that sight disabled person that this word is now has more emphasis. Next one is gonna be strong. And strong stands for stronger emphasis. So even more emphasis shall be placed on that word. And this is only in terms of voice though. Both of them, emphasis and strong emphasis, is in terms of voice. Because what also exists, for example, is the B element. And the B element is also to indicate, hey, this one is of more importance here. But this one the B element shall only be used for indicating keywords inside key text, such as I've been using always inside the CSS file here. So always the ones that are bolded. These are keywords, immediately telling the person what is this paragraph about, for example, what is this text about, the keywords. This is where B element shall be used for. Now all these elements, B for example makes things bold, so which was back in the days used just to make things bold, but which shall not be done anymore nowadays just for making things bold, because bold has no meaning. Why is it bold? Is it bold because it has emphasis in terms of voice, or because it is a keyword? So bold has no meaning at all and shall not be used just for stylistic purposes. Now if I go back to strong, for example, or to EM, this one is actually not bolded but italic. But how the default appearance on all these text elements, the meaningful text elements, is completely irrelevant to us. It's really all about meaning. What the default appearance is, it's sometimes helpful because this is actually how we want things to appear, but it's really irrelevant. It's secondary. It's all about meaning right here, irrespective of the default appearance that those elements get. Same referring to our header elements, completely irrelevant how bold and how font size is actually. It's all about meaning right there. The important thing here is though that things are display block. I mean, that is important, but otherwise it doesn't matter. So let's go for the next one, which is mark. And mark shall be used when we have search results. So let me go to the actual website. This one is done with background color yellow, but as mentioned, doesn't matter. So if I was searching for grade here for exactly that word, then exactly that word grade shall be highlighted here, or shall be wrapped inside the mark element. Now we can only do this, of course, once we have dynamic websites, but this is where how things shall be done. So for example, I've searched on Google for marked text, and then my keywords are bolded right here, indicating this is what I searched for, the query I searched for. So this is where the mark element should be used. The next one is DEL, or let me go for S first. let me go for DEL first. DEL stands for delete. So this is only relevant for us when we are having a website where we, for example, provide the service of doing corrections to people's essays or whatsoever. And then we can, in a dynamic way later, we can make use of the DEL keywords. And what DEL does, it's indicating, hey, this one is deleted. Or if we are having a website on words that are no longer accurate nowadays because they are written differently, so whatever, it's only really useful when we have such a website. But then we shall use the DEL keyword to indicate, hey, this is deleted, and the new version, how to write grade, is inside here, inside the ins element. So grade nowadays is written with 2E, for example, just to come up with a non-accurate example now. So, and for both of these elements, they have two attributes, one of which is cite, which we will encounter in a moment again for other elements, and another one is date time. And here, if possible, then there must be a path to a website that indicates why this is now deleted, that explains the reason why things have changed, but only if exists. And here shall come a format telling when things were deleted, what time, what date, and there are many formats that exist, all of which I have provided a link for. There are many different formats that we can use to only indicate the year, only the month, only the day, only the time, etc. So without going over all of them. So there are many options that we have here. And same, both of them can also be used for the insert. Both of them in the same way. So let us go now for the S. Let me use now here the S element around the brothers right here. And the S element, similar. It's similar to delete, but not exactly the same. So here that's the default appearance of delete, and that's the default appearance of insert. And that's the default appearance of S. But as mentioned, the default appearance is irrelevant. It's what it means. And this one means this is no longer valid, the S. So this is used, for example, it's not inaccurate, it's no longer valid. For example, the price of $99.99 is now crossed out, it's no longer valid. Nowadays it's $39.99. So this is when we shall use it. $99.99 is not inaccurate, it's just no longer valid. So this is when we should use the S instead of the DEL if we're having a purchasing website and have those promotion deals on or something. Then the small element is used for legal disclaimers. So ultimately, now it's not 99. Anything legal disclaimers such as on privacy policies on websites, etc. So the small text that's written underneath the actual terms, that's legal disclaimers. That's where the small shall be used for. Next one is KBD. KBD stands for keyboard data, keyboard input. Whenever we are requesting a user to now press, for example, press F12 to exit full screen, press Control whatever to do whatever. So whenever we have a prompting, a keyboard input, this keyboard input, what the actual keyboard input must be in here, inside KBD. And now comes the time, and the time is not only used for time when we have a time, but also for date. So if we are writing an article as well, on top of the article there's usually the date, time when this article has been written or when it has been modified, for example, then this one shall always be inside the time element. And again, time element has date time to provide the date format also in a formatted way. And again, these ones, there are many different types of formats that can ultimately be used. All I provided a link which can be found in the CSS detail. So that's the time. And now the last one under our category of others, is I. The I element, and that one shall be used for text that is not in the normal prose, not in the regular language, such as technical details, for example. So this is what what is meant, that is offset from the normal prose, such as technical terms or a voice, for example. So to be honest, I'm not 100% fixed now. I kind of get it, but not 100%. But this is what it shall be used for, technical terms. Something that is out of regular, offset from regular language, not in the flow of the actual text, of the actual meaning of the text. Now it's something specific, technical, for example. So this is where the I shall be used for, which in the past was used for making things italic. But it shall not be used for anymore to make things italic. It's error. It's wrong to do it. That's it now under that category. So all we have gone over now are these ones. And those ones I not want to touch on. So this is when we have a website where we have code, any code that must be inside code. Then variables, that's all irrelevant for us. We don't even know what a variable is, at least not from this course yet. This is what we go into when we discuss programming. Then in here comes output from a computer system, so that shall be wrapped inside here. Ruby is only for foreign languages, which is used for the Ruby, which I'm not 100% sure either, because it can only use for East Asian languages. Because shouldn't it be also be used for Russian languages? Anything that's away from Latin text, I think. But yeah, this is, if you are from East Asia, then you might understand this form of typography, why this one should be used. So I want to skip this one, rather now focus on scientific ones. At the same time with the block quote that we haven't yet discussed. Block quote, quote and cite I now want to do together, and I have already a quote right here. And that one, if I place now this quote inside a block quote, it has now the meaning. It's now, everybody now knows, all the other software, screen readers and search engine robots now know this is an actual block quote. This is an actual quote. I'm quoting here. Block quote is display block, meaning things are in its own line, taking up its own line with margin on top and bottom, etc. So this is what block quote does. Now quote itself is an inline level element. So if we are quoting in line with text, so right in the same line. Now the Q element, however, already by default applies the quotation marks. So this is inline quoting, block quoting and inline quoting. And both of them shall only be used to quote persons and not titles, because this is what cite shall be used for. That one is used for quoting titles. And the Q and the block quote, once again, to go back to them, they both have the cite attribute though. And here, if possible, if we are quoting from a document that is online, then the path shall be provided right here inside the cite attribute as the value. And now the definition is pretty clear. So when we have an abbreviation, it shall be wrapped inside here. Definition, this is definition. And last ones I now want to go over is sub and sub, where we now do a repetition now a little bit of vertical align and line height. Because I think these are the two properties from last week that, besides inheritance, getting used to inheritance, that this is always done on the parent. Line height and vertical align. These ones might be the ones that may have a little bit more trickiness inside them. So let me therefore do a quick repetition now. Instead of having done that in the beginning of this week, let me now do it as it fits. First of all, let me now remove a little bit so I can make it a little bit, let me out comment this section here, and let me also remove a little bit of paragraph here so I have enough space. Yeah, that's fine. Let me actually get that one back. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, now we know that the green box and the blue box, they are both inside the yellow container. So they are children of the yellow container, where the yellow container is going all the way from here to here, going all the way. And the line height of this, or the line height in general, is always determined by the content that is inside it. Meaning the line height right now of the yellow box is as high in order to fit the content inside it. And the content is the green box and the blue box. And because the green box is that high right now, therefore the line height, the height of the line box is therefore that high. Right now, this green box cannot move around inside this line box, which is as high as the box that I just marked. It cannot move around, therefore vertical align has completely no effect on the green box. However, the blue box has leeway here, and therefore this one we can move around. Vertical align is not done on the parent, it's not an inherited property. So we can do it only on the blue box, for example. Set it to middle, then it will move to the middle. Set it to bottom, it will move to the bottom. It has leeway, it can therefore move around. That was one important thing to remember. First of all, that the line height is the height of the line box, and that this one is as high as the content in order to fit the content inside. Secondly, we can only use vertical align when that element inside that line box does not take up the entire space. It needs leeway in order to move around, that the values middle, top, bottom, baseline, etc., that they have an effect. And of course, we can always extend the line height to whatever we want to. Then it's not as deep by default as high as in order to fit the content inside it. Can of course manually enlarge it as far as we want, same what we have done right here with our link. Usually it was this high, and that in order to just fit the text inside, but we changed it to the exact height of the box. That's now the height of the line box. The line height is right here, and the text inside the line box of the current font size is always in the middle, always, because that is determined by the baseline. It's always sitting on the baseline, which I have now marked. So always on the baseline. And the baseline is always positioned in a way that the text of the current font size is in the center. And this is how we can ultimately center something, just by setting the line height to the exact same height of the box. Now the question here is with text that I have not gone over last week is, isn't it the case if the line height is that high, then this text still has leeway? So shouldn't it be able to move around here? To top and bottom, for example. And this is not the case, because text shall always sit on the baseline. This is also the case why text cannot have a width and a height. Text, we cannot move it around. However, there is a difference, one single difference. For example, when we have square meters, what happens with the 2 of square meters? Or H2O for an element, for example. What happens with the 2 that goes down? How can we achieve this one? And in actual fact, we can move the text away from the line, but only to the subscript and the superscript. So a little bit towards the top and towards the bottom. This is where we can use vertical align, sub and super. So let me first of all insert here another span element, and let me give it an ID of QQ. And the 2 shall be in here. Now, first of all, the span element, we have set the line height to the anchors to 35 pixel to be exactly the same height as the box itself. And therefore, the line height will be inherited. Line height is inherited. So the span will inherit it. So first of all, I need to reset that one. And that one's QQ. Let me line height, set it to initial or to 0, whatever we want to prefer. And let me now give it vertical align, not top, not bottom, instead sub. So these are other values that we can use, and here we can see the 2 moves down a little bit from the line. And the other one that we can use is super, standing for superscript and subscript. So sub is downwards, super is upwards. Now those ones with CSS, we usually never use, because when we do something like this, then we do it because it has meaning, such as in square meters or H2O. We usually, at least usually, don't do it for stylistic purposes, just to have fun, to have something further up. Sometimes maybe, it depends on the situation, but usually not. Therefore, these ones shall not be used. Instead, their HTML, their meaningful equivalent shall be used. So instead of using now a span here, I will now be using the sub element. And that one automatically makes it further down. It also decreases the font size a little bit. which is good in this case. Even though the appearance doesn't matter, we can always change it. As mentioned, the important thing here is, once again, it shall have meaning. It's indicating to the person reading that code, hey, this is actually now has meaning. It's needed. It has purpose. And this is tells. And it's not super, as I just did wrongly. It's sup, the abbreviation for super. So this is what we should use. These are the values that we have also available. The values that we could also use on boxes, but do not make sense. Vertical align, sup doesn't really make sense. Lastly, before I do a brief transition to next week, is the HTML entities. HTML entities are symbols, characters that we can use by just using their code, their HTML entity code. So not only these characters, so many of them, so many, just as arrows, so many things we can actually use, and that do also make sense to use sometimes. So many of them exist. For example, let me go for a reasonable one right now, which is the copyright symbol, for example. So those ones are used whenever we want a symbol that doesn't exist on our keyboard, but we want to make use of it. So then we use HTML entities. That's one reason. Another reason would be, for example, going into later when we want to escape something. Doesn't matter for now, but that's one reason. So if we don't have that on our keyboard, then we make use of it. So let me go for add copy. And so it's always the and symbol, and then copy, for example. That one would create us a copyright symbol. And then afterwards comes all rights reserved, blah, blah, blah. So this is copyright. So many symbols exist here. I have a little bit of under here another tab, HTML entities, where there is a little bit of a selection of useful symbols, such as arrows that we can use for slideshows, etc. Or for video, stop video, or start video, etc. All these kind of symbols. So many symbols exist. These are HTML entities. And now the last thing I want to go over is the main element, because this one is highlighted in blue. It has cross-browser. Something is happening cross-browser wise here, cross-browser issue, and user select. And therefore, first of all, let us once again, what we have done already several times, go over the process, what actually happens as soon as we hit enter or click a link on a website. Then something happens. So what happens? So then the code comes back. So we are then going to the web server, and code comes back. And what does come back first? Always the content that is inside the index HTML file. So HTML is always the first thing that comes back, because content is the most important thing. Without any content, there would be no need for styling things. And so content is the most important thing. And this is what comes back. And as soon as things come back, then the browser starts reading the code, the HTML code. It starts parsing the code with his HTML parser that is built into the browser. So first of all, it requests and retrieves data. This is what the browser can do, its first major functionality. Secondly, once it has received the HTML code, it can then parse it. It has an HTML parser built in, it can parse HTML code, can make sense of that code. So that's its second core functionality. And then it reads and reads and reads, and then it ultimately encounters a link here. And there is another path. It goes to the web server again. So what happens? It requests and retrieves data again. And this time what comes back is CSS code. And it can also parse CSS code, the browser. There is another portion inside the browser that's in charge of parsing the CSS code. So the browser consists, first of all, of one component that can request and retrieve things. Another one is HTML. It's an HTML parser. Another one is a CSS parser. Then what it ultimately does, once it has read with the HTML code and the CSS code, it creates itself a tree. And a tree, it doesn't matter what that tree is called, even though it has a certain name, the DOM tree. Doesn't matter for now what that means. A tree is just a structured representation of the data that it has read, of the HTML code or of the CSS code respectively. Nothing else. So HTML parser is certainly not something easy to build. Neither is a CSS parser. But all it ultimately does, it can read the code and creates a tree. So the tricky part actually is later. Combining that code and then ultimately out of that combined tree, ultimately getting to the website, displaying it, rendering the website, displaying or painting it, rendering, whichever word we prefer. And that part of the browser here is the browser, the rendering browser engine. And that is the difficult part of the browser. That's the difficult one. A HTML parser is also built, as we have seen now, also built into screen readers, and also search engine robots have an HTML parser built in. A parser is not the hardest one inside the browser. It's the browser engine. And the browser engine, there are free software organizations kind of out there that where the entire world is combining its knowledge and building software, and some of that software has also to do with browser engines, better known as WebKit, for example. That's a browser engine, a brand, and several browsers are using that browser engine, such as Google, or at least a fork, a subcategory of that browser engine, of that code that was built, of that WebKit software, browser engine software, and among which are Apple. Belongs to, Safari belongs to Apple. Safari browser is using that one. Then Chrome is using that one, which belongs to Google, and the other one is Opera. And these three are all based on WebKit, and therefore we are using these prefixes, the names of these prefixes. So WebKit, as we have had to do for the user select. WebKit. This is just referring to the browser engine, the rendering engine. Microsoft uses its own one, a browser engine, which is MS, or its own one in quotation marks. And the mods is also it's not based on WebKit. So therefore, that's the reason for these three sub-prefixes that we need to use. And we will go into further detail there next week as well. So let's go for the main element. The main element, which is right here, also has some cross-browser issues. And we can always find this out by the website can I use. So this is user select, and here it tells us, for example, here are all the major browsers. And from here onwards are the major mobile browsers. And here everything is okay. 8 and 9 we will not support anymore, as we will see next week. And here, prefix is required, supported with prefix MS, supported with, that's the same edge, supported with prefix mods, supported with prefix WebKit. So this is a website always telling us what we can use and how we can use it, which we go into more detail next week. So let's go for the main element, and the main element is fine across, apart from Explorer 9, 10, and 11. There are issues. And therefore, because the browser doesn't know the element, it doesn't support it, it doesn't know it. But we can, and we should, at my recommendation, we should do it. I recommend it at least because sight-disabled people have great use for it. We should add the main element to the browser. We can manually do this by using JavaScript. Now we know how to indicate to the browser inside HTML, hey, now comes CSS code, by using the style. And in here we can place CSS code. And then this CSS code is read by the CSS parser, not the HTML parser. Same thing we can do with JavaScript, which is actually another great component of the browser that does handle JavaScript. And here we can go for script instead of style, telling the browser, hey, now comes JavaScript in here. And here we are telling him, hey, in this document, for the document, this is often referred to as document. I will go over it next week. And document, and without going over now JavaScript, but we should maybe do this. I would recommend it because sight-disabled people have great advantage for it. Create elements, so we can create an element, even though it doesn't exist in the Internet Explorer, we can create it. And the one that we want to create is the main element. Now we know that all these elements are display block by default, because the browser sets them to display block. But now this created main element is not yet display block. Therefore, our website still looks like this. It's broken. Doesn't look as we want it in Internet Explorer. It doesn't understand the main element. Therefore, it does this behavior here. And yet, even though we have now added the main element to the browser, which I go into further detail how later, but we have added it. Now, first what we also need to do, we need to set it to display block, and then everything is fine. So let me just target it here straight away, main and display block. And here we go. Everything is fine again. So this is what we need to do. And here we can see it's a little bit wrong here too. Something I want to go over next week as well. It has to do with cross-browser appearance things. So this is topic of next week. We will find out who is actually in charge of releasing the code. Do the browsers which are owned by the big companies, do they need to comply with that code? And in general, the history of HTML, CSS, and what these words actually stand for, in particular referring to CSS, cascading style sheets. What's cascading? So these are the topics of next week, what we will be discussing there. And until then.